Next month, we're,
I'm sorry.
tell me it's being recorded, okay. Next month, we're meeting on the 15th, beware the Ides of March. And it will be Pam Jenoff, the woman with the blue star, and Eileen Weinstein and Bonnie Zuckerman will be presenting. And that
Hey,
is
what's
all
the
I
book
have.
again? Tell me the book again.
The woman with the blue star, Pam Jenoff. But
When
you're,
do we read Eternal again? When do we read?
when, oh, I have.
Eternal is the next one
April.
after Blue Star.
After,
April.
okay, April.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Is it
thanks,
gonna be
thanks,
April?
Enid. And that's all I have.
Okay, everybody. Today we're discussing Sadiqa Johnson's Yellow Wife, and Arlene Rosenbaum and Anna Kisses will moderate.
Okay, everyone. So I'll start with a little bit of a background and bio on Sadiqa Johnson. She was born in South Philly and she grew up in Logan. She graduated from the George Washington Carver High School of Engineering and Science. And then she went to college in New York and she graduated from Marymount Manhattan College.
We are reading Yellow Wife, right?
Yes.
Yellow Wife.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I suggest everyone mutes themselves?
Yeah, for now.
I can't get this meeting is being recorded. I can't get even that off the screen.
Just say okay.
Doesn't
Press the
say-
button on the right.
She's having problems with her computer.
I always do.
Okay, so I'm going to continue. She went to college in New York. She's an author, she's a motivational speaker, and she's an inspirational blogger. She also works with students in the creative writing MFA program at Drexel. She has written a total of 4 books so far. Her first book was a novel. Her second book was a novel, and her third book was also a novel. She calls them contemporary women's fiction. So this book, The Yellow Wife, is her first historical fiction book. She's the recipient of the National Book Club Award, the Phyllis Wheatley Award, and the USA Best Book Award for the Best Fiction Book. She's a Kimbilo Fellow and a former board member of the James River Writers and a Tall Poppy writer. Now, this next part that I got, I found to be very interesting because I myself am not on Facebook, but when I want to look at something, like I have 2 groups on Facebook that I follow, I just go into my husband's account. And this one group is Renee's Reading Club. I don't know if any of you know about it, but in my other book club, Bonnie Spiegler is one of our members, and she's the one that recommended that I look at Renee's Reading Club. And by looking at Renee's Reading Club, sometimes she will present an author and you just have to go on and click on it and she'll tell you the times. But that's not where I saw Sadiqa. Someone else had posted on Renee's Reading Club about a Glen Cove library that presents, I don't know if it's every month, it might be every month, every other month, an author. So I've signed up and gone on quite a few of those. They're like a Zoom webinar. And sometimes you have chances to actually ask questions and then the author will answer. So that's where a lot of this next group of information came from. So like I said, she's from Philadelphia. She has moved down to Richmond, Virginia with her family. She has a husband and 1 son and 2 daughters. And she said in her earlier days when she was a youngster in Philadelphia, she thinks that that is what made her become the writer that she is. She loved going to the library. Every Monday, she said she would go to the library and she would check out 7 books and she would read them. I think that's pretty amazing. When she was in 7th grade, she won an essay contest. She was a theater major in college, and then she switched to communications. Her first job, she started out in publishing. And one of the people that she worked with was J.K. Rowling. I mean, how amazing is that to be starting out and working with J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. And she said she actually has the first 3 Harry Potter books that are personally signed by J.K. Rowling, and she keeps them up really, really high in her bookcase so that her kids can't get to it. She doesn't want anyone to touch those books. She's also written with worked with in publishing other authors. One of the ones that she mentioned was Amy Tan, and that's someone else who I've enjoyed reading her books. She herself, with her husband, started their own small publishing company, and it's called the 12th Street Press, and that's where her books have been published, the first 3 of her books. I'm not sure about Yellow Wife. She described her writing process. She said that her first novel took her over 10 years to write. As far as this book, The Yellow Wife, she discovered the whole story of The Yellow Wife in 2016. And by 2019, 2.5 years later, it was in the publisher's hands. That during COVID, when she writes, she said it's the whole dynamics of writing has changed, because now she's had her family at home with her, and that even still, she needed to get away a little bit. So she said once a month, she goes away for about 5 days so that she can concentrate even more on writing. And someone asked her if there will be a sequel to Yellow Wife, and she said that she's not sure. She usually doesn't do sequels, but what she likes to do sometimes is take some of the characters, or at least one character from one of her books, and places her or he into the next book. They asked whether it will ever be a movie, and of course she said she would love it to be turned into a movie, and I could picture it being made as a movie, or maybe a made for TV series or something like that. People were very interested to ask her what she's actually reading now. You're an author, what are you reading? And she said that as an author, she gets books from other authors before they're published so that they can read each other's books and kind of put their own reviews into it, and that helps them. But the books that she said that she was reading at the time, and this took the whole interview was on September 14th, so I'm sure she's way past these books, but the 2 books that she mentioned was The Personal Librarian and The Threadbare Collectors. They asked her, where did she get the idea for this story? And she said that she discovered it by accident, that she was they are living now in Richmond, Virginia, and they were out walking and they came upon the Richmond slave trail, and they decided to walk it. And along the way, there are markers, and the markers have different signs giving an explanation of all the different points. And that's where she found out about the Richmond slave trial. And then she just started doing a lot of research, that she went to libraries, she went over newspapers and text, whatever she could put her hands on. She actually visited several plantations in Virginia, and she went into and saw a slave cabin. Where does she get the names of her characters? Well, she said in her research, she found slave ledgers with slave names on them. And Phoebe was a name from one of the slave plantations. Phoebe is actually inspired by a real woman whose name was Mary Lumpkin. I think along with the questions, I included another attachment that's like a paragraph describing Mary Lumpkin, and she was married to Robert Lumpkin, and they were the ones that actually owned this area that's called Devil's Half Acre. She said that someone asked her about the characters that she had written about, which ones were easier and which ones more difficult to write. And I would not doubt this at all. She said that the character that was the hardest to write was the jailer, whose name was Reuben. He was the most difficult. The characters that she enjoyed writing the most was Phoebe and Essex. She really loved their love story. So she said for her, that was just, joy to write. And someone asked her about the relationship between the master and the enslaved person, and she said it's really about survival. That's what the whole thing was about. And in the days of slavery, it was unlawful to teach slaves to read, but Phoebe was a mixed race, so she therefore learned arithmetic She learned how to play piano. She learned how to read. There was a definite hierarchy in the slaves living on a plantation. The field slaves and the others were at the bottom. The slaves that worked in the homes and in the plantation were a higher and considered more important. They had many more privileges. And Sadiqa also said that she read through slave narratives and it gave her a bird's eye view on the whole issue of what took place. She wanted to tell the truth. She said that it was difficult to write, but she felt that it needed to be described and told. And when she gets really at the point of, oh my goodness, this was just too difficult for her, she said she went out for a run. And her run, I think I remember her saying, wasn't just like a mile. She runs like 5 miles at a time. I will say that she was a lovely, lovely person, beautiful to look at and beautiful to listen to. She's just a really interesting person. They asked her again about, will she be writing more historical fiction? And she said her 5th book was actually her second historical fiction book, that it will take place in the 1940s, 1950s, and it will be published in 2023. They asked her, excuse me one second. They asked her if she took any pictures while visiting these different plantations, and she said yes. And I think in the book, she talks about something called a plantation bell. And she said that she actually saw a plantation bell on the plantation where Booker T. Washington lived and was brought up. The character of Miss Delphina, she was the wife of the jailer, the white wife of the jailer, that she described the whole white women and Black women on a plantation and their relationships. She said these white women were very lonely and they were very upset because their husbands were sleeping with slaves. And some of the terms that are used in her book are maybe not terms that we feel comfortable using, but Sadiqa did use the word mulatto. And she said that these mixed women were prized and they were used for sex, or as they called it in the book, fancy girls. They were used in brothels. And when she was asked where did she actually get the title of the book, she said that she found it in Robert Ludlow's will. He said, "Leave it to my yellow wife." The Richmond Slave Trail is a 3-mile route that goes through an area also known as the Devil's Half Acre, and it was only created in 2011. It contains 17 different points that span from the slave ship port at Manchester Dock to Robert Lumpkin's slave jail. And he was the one that was known as the bully trader. I think they may have mentioned in the book that the character who was the head of the Devil's Half Acre, they called him the bully trader. The character of Essex is actually based on someone by the name of Anthony Burns. Phoebe is based on, as I said, Mary Lumpkin, and she had arrived in the jail as a child. They had 5 children together, and Lumpkin treated her and her children as his family. He emancipated Mary after the Civil War. He married her. I'm not so sure that was considered legal in those days, but that's what I had read. And 2 of their daughters were sent to a finishing school in Massachusetts where they passed as white. In his will, Lumpkin left his property and his money to his yellow wife. And Mary leased the property to Dr. Nathaniel Culver, who used it as a seminary school for freed slaves. It later became the historically Black college, Virginia Union University. Sadiqa did use names from plantation ledgers as names for her characters, and she also used real people, such as the ones that were named in the book, Silas Omohundro, Hector Davis, and David Pulliam, and their mulatto wives, Helen, Anne, and Karina Hinton. I will end with a quote that I forgot to write down the name of this one person who did a review or commentary on the book, but she says, "The Yellow Wife has been described as a snapshot from our nation's brutal history and is a painful but necessary look at the human cost of slavery." So now Anna is going to give an overview of the book, and then we can move on to questions.
Well, I chose to review this book with y'all because I spent some time in Virginia. I was originally from Canada and moved to Baltimore. And then when I was in high school, I moved to Virginia. And going from a school that was 80% Jewish to a school that there was 4 Jews in 500, it was a culture shock. So I also ended up going to school at a state school in Southern Virginia. And my brother and sister-in-law have lived in Virginia since the 70s. My sister-in-law is generation Jewish family, like 4. When I read the book, I enjoyed seeing the streets and the locations. And now I'd like to go to that trail that Arlene is speaking of. But I'll do a quick review. I know sometimes people have read the entire book, some people haven't, but I'll make this a quick review. First of all, when I looked at Sadiqa Johnson, her name, I think of a tzaddik. I don't know what the derivation of her name is, but that's what I thought. Her relatively new novel is a tale of enslaved women in Virginia beginning in the 1850s. And it's challenging, some of the things that we've read, but it is beautifully told and it's very thought-provoking, and it's a page turner unless you do what I do and listen to it audio. It's a story about motherhood and sacrifices a mother will make to protect her children, no matter how the babies come into the world. When the story begins, Phoebe Dolores Brown is the protagonist. She's 17 years old. She lives at the Bell Plantation, north of Richmond. She and her mother, Ruth, a well-regarded healer, are inseparable and treated very specially by the plantation owner, Jacob Bell, and their elevated status is due to the part that the mother's rape by Master Jacob encouraged and subsequent sexual encounters ended up in the birth of her daughter. But Ruth does as she's told, and she has a deal that Phoebe will be set free on her 18th birthday. And that's what Phoebe thought her entire life. She was also a favorite of the master Jacob's late sister, Miss Sally, who taught her to play piano, which is part of the story, to read and write. And we learn about what slaves aren't supposed to let people know that they can read and write, and additional skills that are not routinely given to the enslaved. On top of that, as Arlene discussed, she's mulatto, has long wavy hair, and she's beautiful. And at 17, she thinks she's going to be freed within a year. And she falls in love with Essex Henry, who's an enslaved young man who has his own plans to escape, but things don't go as they thought. Phoebe changes as she's bombarded with unexpected deaths and betrayal and cruelty. And Mrs. Delphina, the master's wife, is heartless. And on the day of her mother's death, she sends her off to be punished. And she ends up in the infamous jail known as Devil's Half Acre. And if y'all want to think, I'm using y'all today, if y'all want to think what a half acre is, I live on 1/3 of an acre. A half acre isn't much bigger. That's a tiny chunk of land where all this happened, where people spend their lives, might live their entire lives out. And it's explained about the smells and the circumstances of that location. So basically the novel is quite gut-wrenching. Sadiqa doesn't shy away from the smells and the ravages and the cruelty. And but there is a theme that everyone there cares deeply for their children, their friends, and their family. They dance, they sing, they love, they celebrate. And there's an honor in Phoebe's stamina and courage and resilience. And it follows that through the book. Phoebe has compassion for strangers, specifically for the fancy women, that she shows them, she's unfortunately entrusted with the job of preparing women to be sold into whorehouses. And that's a struggle for her, but that's part of what happens during the book. So it basically gives us a glimpse into history, and I, while reading it and while discussing it with Arlene, had I thought about the Holocaust and how humans can treat humans inhumanely. So it's not a wholly depressing novel, and there's great sadness, but there's also speaks leveling of motherhood, of survival, of what people need to do to survive, of the story transcends by capturing Phoebe's joy and splendor. She finds her existence through her children. And when you're at the end of the novel, you're rooting for Phoebe and her family. It doesn't pull any punches. It talks about this painful period. It's important for us to understand from that point of view. And I think it enhances our understanding of that period. So with that, I think we can start. If Arlene, you want to start with the questions.
Sure, and Eileen, you'll be able to see, who's raising their hand. So if you could call in them.
Sure.
So our first question is, when Phoebe moved to work in the house for Mrs. Delphina, she had a moment where she sits in Mrs. Delphina's chair and uses her hairbrush. She looks in the mirror and she muses, with a little rouge and a proper gown, I could fit in like a member of the family. Why would Phoebe want to fit in like a member of the family? In what ways did this scene foreshadow what would happen to Phoebe in adulthood?
Feel free to unmute.
When
Bonnie,
I was unmuted.
go ahead, Bonnie.
Well, with her light color, in fact, her daughters did pass. The idea is that it would be possible with her light skin, if people didn't know her, and if she had the proper clothes and the makeup, she could pass for white, and her life would certainly be a hell of a lot easier. So that's one thing, and she can see that in the mirror. She was raised to be very proper and ladylike, and she had a lot of skills, her musical skills and cooking skills. She knew what she was about, and that would be a much better position if she fitted into the family than if she was when she lived as a slave. And of course, that's how it eventually she does live as the mistress of a household. But even though he keeps pushing her down, again, her husband, because, no matter how much you think you're white or you're in place of privilege because you're my so-called wife, you're still my slave. So that foretells the duality of the book.
Sue, you're muted.
Yeah. As a suggestion, a couple books before I read this, I read The Warmth of Other Suns, which is about the Black migration from the South to the North. And she picks, I think it's 8 or 10 slaves and tells their story. And it goes hand in hand with this book because their stories are told from beginning to end. So I really recommend it. If it's bad, but it's not as brutal as this book, but very informative.
Sue, what's the name of the book?
The Warmth of Other Suns. She's the one that wrote Cast.
Oh, okay.
Wilkerson, Christine Wilkerson, I think. Amazing stories, amazing. The survival, the what they went through, similar to this, but these are real stories.
Yeah, it's nonfiction. It's a nonfiction book.
Right.
Bonnie, were you holding it up?
No, I was just trying to find out the book of, what was the title again?
The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. Very, very good. It's a big book, so it's engrossing, and again, information that a lot of it you don't know. Thank you.
Denise?
Yeah, it's curious that at one point, not curious, but it's just weird that at one point in the book, Phoebe says that she sees love in the eyes of the jailer. And it's just astounding to think that this person, this man, could have affection for her and maybe even love, but he thinks of her as just another
Right.
slave, another N-word. And she realizes that to the jailer, she is the same as those that are chained up in the jail.
Alan, you had your hand up? Muted.
I was going to, when we were talking about the warmth of other suns, that's probably the most significant book of the century that when it was written. And I recommend it highly if you haven't read it already. That, and definitely read Cast. If you missed it, if you came to a book club of Cast and you hadn't actually read it, go back and read it.
It is a superior book, and it does cover the Jewish experience also. It's a
Yes.
tough book. I read it in 2 sections. I read half of it, and I'm being honest, I just felt I couldn't take any more. And I read something light, and then I went back. It's definitely worth reading.
Maybe we should give people a year's notice to read one or the other for next year.
That sounds good. Okay, I think, Diana, did you have your hand up, and Fran?
Yeah. They were talking about how the jailer treated her, and yes, he certainly did make sure she knew her place. But I also thought it was interesting in contrast when they visited the plantation where the white wife was questioning Phoebe because she wasn't sure if she was white or black, and she wanted to know her relationship to him, to the jailer. And the white plantation wife's husband later said to her, basically, you do as I say, I am the master. You may not want to accept her because she may not be white. You may not want anyone black under your roof, which is what she had said. But you have to listen to me because I am the master. So I just thought that was an interesting, not exactly a contrast, but the way the patriarchal system works, no matter what.
That's an interesting point, because I think we need to realize that women had no standing then, white or black.
Right.
And I think looking at Miss Delphina shows you that. I mean, it's very sad. Fran?
I was going to say, he took her because he couldn't do any better, because it was said very explicitly in the book that no white woman would have lived with him given what he did, what was going on at the jail, the horrors and abominations, the smell, literally. A lot of that reminded me of the concentration camps. I mean, it was sort of a horrible thought that came to me almost right away. She lived a luxurious life as long as she was compliant. But if she crossed him in any way, it reverted to being a slave and being mistreated. And I imagine many wives were not treated very well because of the general attitude. Women didn't have much power over their existence. So that would be interesting to look into.
Harriet?
I thought Delphina was as brutal, if not I mean, from a woman's perspective, she was just as awful as the master. And the worst part is everyone knew it. So when they wanted to make an example of what was the boyfriend? I just went blank.
Essex.
Essex.
Thank you. How did I forget that? Essex. Who did they choose in that community? They chose the most brutal because he would enjoy it the most and make the biggest show of it. I think that whole example of when it was like entertainment for the community, it brought me back to another book we read, and I can't recall which the author or the title was, but it was about, maybe it was something I read in the synagogue. We read Caste, maybe it was in there. But it talked about how when they would hang people, they would lynch them, Black people, that they would make that entertainment. And I had never known that until we started really getting into these stories.
I think throughout history, you have the Roman gladiators, you have the French
Hanging was,
Revolution,
Yep,
was entertainment.
throughout
got
history.
guillotined while other women knitted. It doesn't say much.
Human
for
nature,
time.
ugly human nature.
And to bring your children.
I
You
know.
see that.
Donna?
And also bullfights. That's also very gory and nasty. Just wanted to bring up that he had sex with the jailer had sex with Phoebe, but it was completely unsatisfying to her. I mean, it was not a rape. Oh, I guess it was a rape, but it was completely he would just do his thing and she would go off in space and think about other things. Wanted to bring up Sissy, I think that was her name. That was another slave that he had sex with, and she had a son. And I don't quite understand this, but a lot of times it seems like Sissy was taking care of Phoebe's children as well, which must have been hard for Sissy. Yellow wife. I tried to figure out what yellow wife meant. Obviously, it's not white wife, but does anybody know where the term yellow wife came from? Question.
Fran?
I don't know exactly where it came from, but the mulatto women were referred to as yellow and high yellow.
Yes.
And I think the lighter you were, the more attractive you were, which followed through among the Black community for many years because they valued the lighter skinned Black, brown people. I don't know if that's still the case, but there was a value placed on that. So that's how it came about. And wife, they were actually more of a concubine than a wife. But,
Right.
she had the privileges of a wife, basically. The lifestyle of a wife.
Right.
So I think we can move on to check question number 2. Why do you think Miss Sally took an interest in Phoebe? In what ways do you think that her influence affected Phoebe's personality and outlook on her future predicaments?
Harriet? You're already
Well, she was the only living relative once Sally, only blood relative of the jailer once Sally passed. Sally was his sister. And so she saw her as the family or closer to family.
It's very interesting to me that Sally obviously valued Phoebe, but that didn't seem to, for most whites, go along with releasing the slaves from bondage. So she gave Phoebe this wonderful background, and what was she supposed to do with it? Because she was, as a slave, not supposed to have any of it. Now, in the end, maybe it saved her and made her more attractive to the jailer, but it boggles my mind. I mean, even like going forward to The Help, the book The Help, that the black people could take care of their kids, but they couldn't use the same bathroom. They weren't allowed to eat off of the same plates. It's such a dichotomy of thinking. I just, I don't know, blows my mind. Fran, and then Karen. Fran, you're muted.
You're muted. Unmute. We can't hear you.
Ask to unmute.
Thank you. I don't know what happened there. I think, upon thinking about it, that it was a fear of, it was a power relationship, and it was a fear that if they were treated the black people too well, that they would overcome them. Because everything they're doing was meant to keep them subservient, to dehumanize them.
Right.
Yes, you're a sweet little, it's almost like, you know, a terrible analogy, but you're a sweet little puppy dog, so I will pet you and I will give you treats and I will give you a pretty collar to wear or a sweater, but you have to listen. And if you don't listen, you're in a lot of trouble. And that has went on for years and years. I mean, it's still a thread even now. I mean, not as much so, but that's why we have a lot of the division we have right now in the country. And
If
it's
I could-
unfortunate, but
But
I
don't you
think,
think, I was thinking it was more guilt, that she, it relieved some of her guilt, that she was her only blood relative. She never had children. She saw something in her and it relieved some guilt of what she was going through to educate her, teach her piano. And, it did help her in the end. Maybe she thought it was her way, if she could use it to advance herself and get out. She wasn't going to physically do it for her friend, but she would give her some of the ability to do it.
I don't think everybody was aware of it as a power relationship. I don't know that Sally necessarily was. She was somebody to pet and be nice to, and she was a bright, pretty little girl who had manners and behaved. So she didn't necessarily on a conscious level perceive her as a threat, but I'm speaking about the dynamic underneath it all.
I can see both your points. Elaine.
She was a woman, and women did not have as much power, so she didn't have the power to release the slaves. Maybe if she had more power, she could have. But if her brother had lived and Phoebe did end up going to Massachusetts for school, that probably would have been the thing that finally put her free, because once she got to the East, there were more blacks that were free. And I think that that's what was in her mind at the time. Of course, she didn't know she wasn't going to be there when Phoebe turned 18, but I think that had a lot to do with it. That was the best way she could do to get her to be free.
Lori.
Sally also was ill. She knew that she wasn't going to have a long life. She knew that she probably would never marry. There was no mistress of the plantation because her brother wasn't married at that time. So, in a sense, she treated her like she was her aunt. The brother felt differently about, her mother and the child that she bore, and it just went over as a kindness. She was a kind person. She gave her those opportunities.
I
Also,
agree.
they tried to show you that some of the punishment on Jacob's plantation was not as severe as in other places, and how well he treated his favored slaves, the man that was like a butler to him and the driver. It just showed you that there was some form of compassion. And I really think that there was a true love or compassion and caring with Phoebe and her mother from Jacob. Even after the marriage, which caused all of the problems with his wife.
I agree with you. And there's a question that's not listed here, but just by a raise of hands, does anybody think that Jacob really would have released Phoebe at her 18th birthday if he hadn't?
Yes,
I think, yeah.
I think he would have.
Donna, did you want to say something?
Yeah, there was a scene in the book where Sally was with Phoebe in a store and somebody mistook Phoebe to be her daughter. And that was not corrected, which I thought was interesting. And when she was at the jail, Phoebe was reading and the jailer saw her reading and he threatened her. And apparently blacks, if they weren't allowed to read, they could get their fingers cut off if they were reading and writing. But then later in the book, he knew she was reading and she taught her daughters how to read. So I thought that they were interesting points.
If I recall correctly, he actually set a trap for her, that he left a book on her
Yes.
nightstand
Yes.
to see if she could read, which really.
Oliver Twist. He
An
left.
interesting one, Oliver Twist, of someone who,
Yeah.
yeah.
Vivian. You're muted. Unmute. Vivian, you're muted.
Also, when they went to the store, the store owner mistook Phoebe for the daughter of Sally's daughter. So obviously there was a resemblance. There was a very, very strong connection. She was definitely treated as a niece and not as a slave. And it's until the owner died, she was going to be freed. She was a daughter and she had the freedom to go in the house, the freedom to play the piano. She was not really enslaved like the others.
Diane?
Don't forget that she was also taught to speak like a white woman. This bothered a lot of people later, and she had insisted for her son Monroe that he speak properly like a white gentleman, which got him into big trouble when he was sent to another plantation. He was hired out to another plantation when he was 5 years old. And the new plantation owner did not like that he was speaking uppity. And that changed Monroe greatly, that he felt it was way too dangerous to speak like a white person, and he went back to the slave dialect. Oh, for Phoebe, that helped save her, and why I think that and her attitude, her expectation of, you can't make me disrobe. My credentials are enough. You don't need me to disrobe at this auction house. That attracted the jailer, the Reuben LaPierre. So her white diction and her self-confidence that came from her upbringing and the way she spoke and everything else made a big difference for her.
You know, in other countries, how you speak, particularly like England, distinguishes your class. We here in America have really never had that. I mean, I ain't and things like that maybe, but it's not been a class defining thing. And I think it was really important for the Southerners to keep blacks below, and the speech was a huge part of that. I've read a lot of historical fiction taking place in England, and it's fascinating that you open your mouth and everyone knows where you're from. Ellen?
Excuse me. There was a movement in education in this country not that long ago to let Black students speak what they were calling Ebonics.
Right.
And the lady who wrote her doctoral dissertation promoting this was a lady named Geneva Smitherman. And I met her several years after she had written this. And she was absolutely aghast at what she had done. She said to me, I condemned that generation of students to the lowest paying jobs, because people will not hire Black kids who cannot speak properly. And there was this is a very important topic in education.
Very interesting.
Thanks for sharing that.
Donna?
Well, I think we can go on to our next question.
Okay, I think Donna wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry, Donna.
Just real quick, Phoebe's mother said to her, "You're a slave in body, but not your mind." And that mantra really helped her. And she tried to tell that to her son, but the son said, "Let's stop pretending." And he stopped talking, let's say, the white lingo, and he went back to the Black lingo. But that also leads me to remember, and you probably remember too, in the book Help, where the Black slave would say to the white person, the child that she was taking care of, "You was pretty, you was smart, you was good." It's like a mantra. It's one way to help a child with their self-esteem. As mothers, a lot of times, or caregivers, we try to give children self-confidence. But I thought that was a very important note that Phoebe's mother had said, that she's a granddaughter, the queen in Africa. So that was just an important mantra. Thank you.
I'm going to just pipe in there for just a second. My daughter, when she was very young, she said she knew she was a good girl. And I asked her how, and she said, because that's what her Kiddush cup said. It said Yalda Tova, good girl. So she identified with that. Just putting a little Hadassah in there.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. And it is, when Phoebe is serving dinner to Master Jacob and Mrs. Delphina, she's instructed to stand against the wall and pretend not to listen. She says, "Mama always said the way to keep peace with white folks was to be available and invisible at the same time. How does this resonate with modern times? And what are the current socio-political implications of this?"
Harriet?
Actually, that reminds me of Downton Abbey, when the servants were supposed to be invisible. And basically they were the servants in this story.
It's really a big leap to me to pretend that the person who's in the room with you isn't hearing anything. But I guess that's what upper class people do with their servants. Not having any servants, I wouldn't know. But it's truly, and I know it's true, but it's remarkable to me. Anybody else? Okay, then, shall we move on?
Okay, the next question is, though Mrs. Delphina is aware that Phoebe is Master Jacob's daughter, she seems to take her wrath out on Phoebe rather than her mother Ruth. Why do you think this is?
I think she felt she could get away with it easier. That he obviously loved her mother. He wouldn't allow either of them to be whipped. Bonnie, what were you going to say? You're muted, Bonnie. We're not hearing you, Bonnie.
He's a child, so, it's seen but not heard. Whereas an adult has more sway. And her mother was pretty tough. She stood up for herself. And she tried to teach Delphina to stand up for herself. In fact, she did teach her that. In a nice way. She always said, be careful how you phrase it. All I was going to say.
Phoebe was also, I suppose, a reminder that she didn't have children. And it must have created great fear to her that her husband had this daughter and she could give him no one.
Right. Must have been an interesting situation because the black fellow was able to give her a child. I forget his name already.
Essex.
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 He was able to give her a child, which was really horrendous that she took this child and drowned it.
And you want, I mean, she did take the child to her breast. She did keep the child alive initially. I mean, it was her child. So as miserable a person as she appears, that had to be an awful thing. And yet she could never present that child as hers, because
Right.
that would be admitting that she was sleeping with a slave.
Right.
Well, as the days went on, that's when the pigment started to come out. Remember, the ears started looking darker, and that's when the fear came in and the instinct to care for the baby dissipated.
Elaine?
Well, I was going to say basically something on the order of what Harriet said. It was because Phoebe was looking more white when she came out, because I think her mother was more, had some white within her, where when it came to Essex, he had black, and the baby came out as a black child, and that her husband definitely would know that it was not his child, and she couldn't let that happen. And she was trying, I think the reason why she wanted a child so badly was she was afraid if she didn't present him with a child, that in the end, Phoebe would inherit the plantation from him, because she would be his only living relative at some point.
It's interesting.
I think there's also a theme in the book of different reactions through all kinds of women. The plantation woman who sees, I think it often happened that husbands had slave children, and that's a struggle for all the women. And I think there's a big diversity on how individuals reacted to slavery, from Miss Sally's position to just there would be a lot of reactions, individual reactions.
Diana?
Delphina came from further south. She also was trained by her mother that slaves have to be forcibly kept in their place at all times. And that's the way she treated Jacob, her husband's slaves, including Phoebe and Ruth, of whom she was a lot more jealous of. Although why she made Phoebe her house servant, her maid, what do they call them? Her personal maid. I'm not quite sure why, but she did. Also, Phoebe, in her own mind, had come up with other solutions for Miss Delphina's black baby, and it was to give that baby to a field hand to raise, and just keep that baby as a slave and not acknowledge it, that it's the slave's child, and let it go at that. But of course, Delphina couldn't have done that with the fear that it would come out more readily than otherwise.
I think that we need to think about the effect of slavery, what it actually did to generations of blacks, because to this day it is valued to be lighter. And the only way you get to be lighter is that there's a whole lot of white blood, excuse me, which means that women were raped. And it's so sad. But I also taught in black areas, as did Phil, and to this day, that is what is valued, and not by all, certainly. But it gives you some idea of the effects of slavery, that you were so put down, you did whatever you could to survive. And the mentality has continued till today. Other people had their hands up. Lori?
I thought it was weird that Delphina had sex with Essex. That in the book kind of bothered me. It was very out of character. And I mean, they tried to explain it by the fact that she was trying to get back to her husband because he was gone so much and she was lonely. But you have to realize this wasn't something that Essex was really raped by Delphina. It wasn't something that he had chosen to do. He felt that he was cheating on Phoebe. And it just, that to me, you know, that the author she did that for her story to continue. That it was a weird kind of thing to put into the book.
Fran, and then Ellen, and then Harriet.
You're muted, Fran.
Oh.
While Fran unmutes, can I just say, think about, it's not as weird as you think. Let's go back to in history, Potiphar's wife and Joseph. That's nothing new. Francine, are you unmuted yet? And I'll mute.
Thank you, Ellen. Fran, you're not unmuted still.
Now I am.
Okay.
I think I almost forgot it wasn't, I mean, it was weird to us, but I think one of the things that was brought out was that a number white women did sleep with the slaves or the black men out of resentment, perhaps out of loneliness, out of boredom, because they saw their husbands doing it. So it was kind of like a revenge. She got caught probably when she became pregnant. She just was hoping for the best or not even thinking about it. When she had the baby and he was obviously black, she had to get rid of it. She had to have been petrified because he wouldn't have just said naughty, naughty. She would have been cast off. She would have been vilified. Everybody it would have been awful for her. So that's generally why it was there. It was just something that happened that I think many of us didn't really think of or weren't aware of it because it was part of the underbelly of the plantation life, I would guess.
It was a way that she could sort of get back with her husband, like, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Exactly.
Also, there's history. I'm going to just throw in how this is. I think the author wanted to make it apparent that this happened also during those times. And if you're looking back on history, I think of Potiphar. This is a biblical story. Who Joseph gets seduced by her, and then she accuses him of raping her. So it's like, it's a power thing.
Right.
For slaves.
Harriet?
Definitely. I'm in total agreement about it. It's a power thing. And of course she described him as pretty hunky. Let's get real here. I mean, the description's in there. And so there was an appeal. The same reason there was an appeal, you know, between Phoebe and Essex.
So it has nothing to do with anything. I just wanted to tell Audrey and Marcia that I'm so enjoying your dogs because they're just so adorable.
Thank you, Eileen. You know I love my dog.
I know.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
mine
God.
loves coming to book club. He loves the book club. Thanks.
As one who's allergic and can have no animals in this house, they're just so cute. Anyway, Fran.
That's also why Essex had to run away. He had to escape because he knew that if anybody saw that baby, her first recourse would be to accuse him of rape and he'd be dead.
Mm-hmm.
So he had, you know, he lost no matter how it turned out.
Yeah,
that's true. Laura?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in a different thought. Of course, I completely agree. There are elements of power, control. This was the system. But I was just going to throw in that I think people are really complicated. And obviously, we don't know the thinking behind what I guess my point in thinking that I just wanted to mention. The complexity of love, like I think Phoebe had a lot of hatred, obviously, for her master, but there was probably an element of love mutually, not the love that I could recognize, maybe most of us can recognize, but that doesn't mean that within most of the characters, there may have been some spark of understanding that people are people. And that's, I guess, the thought that I just wanted to share, that we can't assume that it's all negative, that obviously the system of slavery is and always will be an abomination, but there always were people that were against it. So whether it was the aunt that was teaching Phoebe, it may have been she recognized her humanity, whether it was through blood or just seeing it. And I'm just, I just was throwing in the complexity of that in there.
Yes.
Thanks, Laura.
Sure.
Fran?
In Faulkner's books, he brings that out. The children, when they were children, the white children and the black children played together. They slept together. They were like brothers. And then suddenly at some point, the dichotomy emerged, and one was master and one was servant. And you can't escape the feeling that you had for somebody you played with when you were little. I mean, they were a lot of times raised by the mammies. So they were almost like brothers, and I don't know about brothers and sisters, but almost like brothers. And you can't escape that. On the other hand, you have to overcome it, because if you're white, you're the master, and if you're black, you're the slave. So it's part of the complexity that you were talking about.
Also reminds me of the play South Pacific, Jewish composer. You've got to be taught to hate. You've got to teach children how to hate. They don't.
That's true.
Donna and then Harriet.
Yeah, Laura, I think you've got a really good point there. I think the jailer had some kind of feelings for Phoebe. And at one point, I think the night of the escape almost, he said to her, "Tell me you love me." And she actually looked him in the eye and she said, "I love you." I don't think she loved him, but I think he needed her to say that she loved him. And she obediently said that and looked him in the eye. But I think he had feelings for her. She did give him 5 kids, 4 girls and the son that died. But yeah, it's very complex. Good point.
Arlene, do you think we should piggyback number 10 onto this?
I think I saw Diana and 2 more people, maybe Harriet and someone else, and then we'll go on.
Oh, okay, I'm going backwards. With Essex Henry, he couldn't win no matter what. Delphina told him, "If you don't have sex with me, I will tell everybody you did." So he felt he had no choice. And when it came to running away, when Delphina was pregnant, he was trying to block it all from his mind. It was when Essex told Phoebe, she said, "Oh my God, you have to run before Delphina's baby is born, because if you wait, you could be in big, big trouble." So that's why he left earlier than he anticipated, and Phoebe forced him to leave without her because he obviously wanted Phoebe to go with him.
Harriet has her hand up.
Francine, when you were talking about learning, South Pacific, to learn to hate, I was thinking about the story when the kids were playing and they were playing auction, and there was, that's, oh boy, that was.
Yeah. It's what you see. Fran and then Denise.
Okay, I'm going to when we were talking about the jailer briefly. The jailer was really a pariah in white society, because nobody, in other words, he went beyond the pale, and people laughed maybe or went to see it. But as far as having a relationship or a bond or a trust, it wouldn't exist. And as I said, Phoebe she was far beyond him and above him, but she was the best he could do. And she just knew that if he wanted her to say she loved him, she had to say she loved him, because she had to survive.
Denise.
Yeah, I guess I want to backtrack a little. I don't really agree, Laura, with your comment about if it applies to the jailer. If it applies to Master Jacob, I can see that he had some redeeming qualities. But to me, the jailer was completely, a horrible human being. I'm thinking of the point where he's jealous. He suspects there's something going on with Phoebe and Essex. And he says that he will, if she goes to Essex, he will sell Monroe, her child. I mean, and he just uses women over and over as he chooses. I just think, he may have deluded himself into thinking that he loved Phoebe, but that was it. It was just a delusion.
Well, the question is whether he even had the capacity for love. I just wonder how a person like that can develop. I mean, that bothers me. It just really bothers me. He did not have any redeeming features.
Well, he kept her, he kept Phoebe from being sold to a whorehouse.
But it
So
was,
in a sense, he saved her.
yes and no, because look what she got stuck with.
Yeah,
No,
look what she had. She was at
She
his
had a good life materially. She had a good life. She really did.
Yeah.
You know what? I think you need to keep some things in mind. She got to keep her kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that little stint with Monroe on the farm was to show her she didn't have power.
Right.
But she got to keep her kids. And with most slaves at that time, that was breaking up families was what they did. They didn't want bonds.
Right.
Well, that was part of the power dynamic.
Absolutely.
Because you're
I
splitting
think
them
that
up.
we really need to go on.
So, yeah, I mean, if you want to look at it that way, you could say that was the benefit to her, but I saw little other to commend him.
Margie, I'm wondering.
I've been thinking about the jailer. If he were more appreciated and was able to have a wife in the white society, I mean, to me, he didn't fit into the white, as Fran said, the white world or the black world. If he fit more into the white world, would he not have been as mean? Who knows? He really didn't fit in anywhere.
Well, he was pretty mean.
In ways, believe it or not, I feel badly for him.
Well, it's a very interesting thing. I didn't feel badly for him, but I will say that white society not accepting him because he sold slaves is kind of amusing, considering that it was white society that was buying the slaves from him.
Exactly.
If he didn't do, he wouldn't have a business.
Exactly.
So, but I think
I understand that, but if he had chosen another business or doing something differently, would he have been a different person? Who knows? I find him a very intriguing character.
We're kind of running a little bit,
I know.
we're running behind on our questions. I'm wondering if we could sort of piggyback our question number 10, which is about this discussion. And just to tie it up a little bit, says Phoebe describes the jailer as looking at her with love in her eyes, as we were just discussing. Historians of slavery, particularly Black feminist historians, have fiercely contested narratives, both fiction and nonfiction, that encourage such an interpretation, insisting that there should be no love between master and enslaved. Most see these, quote, romantic relationships as simply rape. And we have been discussing it now, but the question was, what are your thoughts on their relationship? Could the jailer, as Phoebe's oppressor, actually love her? So, I mean, you could think about that, or we could move on to another question. Margie?
I think the jailer, in his thinking and his way of expressing feelings and emotions, did love her, because he wasn't allowed to love a white woman. So in his own way, it's not a healthy way. I'm not saying it's healthy. I think he loved her.
Bonnie also had her hand up.
I thought similarly that he was using her and he knew it. He loved her. It was convenient. It worked out. She gave him children. But there was the relationship with in Lincoln's time, which is close to when we're talking now, where one of the important officials in Lincoln's office, and I forget which one, did have a relationship with his housekeeper, with his Black housekeeper. And they really did love each other. So it was possible. But he didn't hold her up and scorn her in public either. This guy flew both ways. And I think that belied whether if you love her, you keep your mouth shut. If you can't say something nice, you keep your mouth shut. Well, he didn't do that. He'd have to tear her down. So I don't think it was the love that a normal person would be looking for or be trying to express.
Audrey?
I think he loved what she gave him. She gave him a partner in life and she gave him the children. So I think that's what he loved, the gifts that he got from her, but not necessarily her. He didn't know how to love, I don't think.
She was
Diana?
also a helpmate in that she helped run the business. And don't forget one of the other ones, Corinna Hinton, one of the other mulatto concubines for one of the other jailers, one of the other slave auction people. She also helped run her husband's business. So that's what happens.
Eileen?
Yeah. I agree that in his mind, he thought he loved her. There was a lot of things that she did for him and gave to him that he really appreciated. And to him, that was probably love. But love only, his capacity for real love was limited. And any disobedience he saw as betrayal, and then the love went away. I don't think that's so different than, you know, there are people who are like that today, regardless of race. I just think that his love was transactional. As long as she was doing for him, he, you know, felt that he loved her, but that had its limits.
Thank you. Okay, Arlene and Anna, you want to pick something else?
Can I?
Unless, I think I see Lori wants to.
Yeah, can I say something? I think that the fact that he sent July away, who taken care of his children from birth, showed you that he didn't have a heart. He had no compassion. And when he said that he was going to send July away to punish Phoebe, she said, how can you do that to your children? You know, that she raised your children, they love her, and you saw how they cried afterwards. That it really showed you that to him, punishment was more important than compassion. His power.
Good. Agreed.
Okay, I think some of the rest of the questions might already be tied into many of the discussions that we've had, but it's always interesting to hear everyone's point on them, their take on them. So I'm on question number 5. In the novel, children are portrayed oftentimes as either a source of joy for a family, a blessing, or a source of sorrow and tragedy. There are many scenes of mothers losing children in a myriad of ways. Discuss the sacrifices enslaved mothers had to make during this time in history.
I can't imagine being separated from your children. And every black slave, I guess depending on her owner, knew that that was a real possibility. And that is just the saddest thing to me. And it was a way to make money. And if you impregnated your slave, you were guaranteed another slave to sell. It's something that I will never understand. Anybody else? Laura?
Yeah, this is stating a little bit what you're saying as well, Eileen. It's almost stating the obvious. The fact that there ever was an economic system where you can buy and sell and control another human being is really, I hope for most of us, truly beyond our comprehension. And everything really just about this book falls from there, that this was a system that was, for some people, okay with, for many not, but it's just, I don't know, it always has been and always will be beyond my current comprehension that slaves would be sold at an auction the same way that you would buy merchandise. So the dehumanization is just, it really is, it's just hard to imagine that this was an accepted for so long and not that long ago, that this was really such a fundamental economic and political thing that happened. And
the effects of it.
Yep, Laurie?
I think that this was something about family was something that the author wanted to put in the forefront. I don't know if you recall, but after July was sent away, Tommy said he grieved for his sister, and Phoebe said that she had never known that Tommy and July were brother and sister. Both of those two children who had been around since they were children had previously been treated well. And then here, they're separated. They didn't even acknowledge each other. So people would know, probably because they didn't want that relationship to be detrimental to them.
Do you think that they were his children?
It had occurred to me that they might be.
Do I think they? I don't know. I never really thought about that. Do you think they were his children?
They had special privileges.
They did. But it didn't stop them from beating Tommy.
Right.
Right. And we never heard anything about the mother, if there was, and if they were his children, then he certainly did get rid of the mother.
Fran?
When Hester was born, he had an extreme emotional reaction and said this was the first child. He never thought he would have a child. Now, I don't know how this applies. I mean, it can be when I say it doesn't mean that they weren't his children, but it leads me to believe that maybe they weren't. But they could have been.
Or at least someone who he valued.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Then let's go on.
I'm going to combine, because we're running short of time a little bit, I'm going to combine these two questions. One is number 6 and number 9. Compare and contrast Phoebe and Essex's treatment as a man and a woman within the institution of slavery. In what way was their different modes of survival different based on their genders? And then piggybacking onto that is number 9. Phoebe is anything but a damsel in distress. Where do you think her strength and resilience comes from? How do you think she endures her life with the jailer in the parts of her story that we don't get to know? So we're talking about gender and the institution of slavery. You can answer one or both. Either.
Bonnie?
I think Phoebe's strength comes from Ruth, from her mother, because, anytime there was like a difficult situation, she'd always, be thinking about what her mother would have done. So I really think that's, I'm just going to answer that part of the question, but her strength definitely came from her mother.
Denise?
And just as an addendum to that comment by Bonnie, it was even heartbreaking to realize that the slaves didn't know their lineage, but Phoebe's mother knew some of it, and she would always remind her, you are the daughter of, this person and that woman. But that, that really drove home to me that another tragedy is slavery.
Eileen, is your hand up?
Yes. I also thought that part of her strength, most of her strength came from her mother, but also from Miss Sally, who really treated her like a lady and gave her a lot of those tools. So she grew up knowing and feeling in her heart that she was born to be free and that she was not meant to be owned and that she was a person of value. And I think that when times were tough, she just fell back on that knowledge in her heart that came from both of those women.
Donna?
Just thinking back to the people from the Holocaust, I don't remember where I heard this, but people who were able to survive the Holocaust had good childhoods before taken away. They had love for their parents. And the point here is that if you have love and a feeling of self-love and and being important to yourself and into the world, that can help you. And I think that Ruth, the mother of Phoebe, gave that feeling to her daughter. That helped her survive.
It's interesting to me that there are kids that grow up in really terrible families and just survive to do great things.
Me. What are
And
you looking for?
perhaps they're just more resilient.
You
That
know,
they
I have
were born
to,
that way.
I have to get pumped.
And you know, I don't know. I mean, I understand with Phoebe, she had her mother and all of that. There were definite differences between the men and the women, because except for Essex, which became apparent that he was raped, women were at everybody controlled them. So they had no power, and they had to grow up surviving the best they could, which is why Ruth accepted Jacob. It's not, I think, that she had any particular feeling for him, except that he might be the conduit to let her daughter free. But she repeated over and over to Phoebe that you've got to do what you can. Anybody else? Diana?
Talking about mothers and children, yes, Ruth kept telling Phoebe that everything I do for you. And that's what Phoebe kept telling Monroe. Everything I'm doing for you, to keep you safe and to help you, even though Monroe didn't really see it because he was raised by July. He was sent away and Phoebe to that other farm plantation, and Phoebe could do nothing. When the jailer came in and saw his daughter being teased by a little older Monroe, they were what, 5, 6 years old, less. He got so upset that that was when he sent Monroe away. He hired him out to another plantation and didn't let Phoebe know that he was at least safe, that he wasn't sold. You know, even Sissy, who was the other slave woman that the jailer had a child with, Sissy wanted the best for her son, her child. And if you remember, Phoebe was, oh, thank goodness, Sissy's son is dark. So I just have to protect my kids, my lineage. I can't let myself be usurped by Sissy, because then it would hurt my kids, which, by the way, is what all the queens and kings used to do. The queens used to do to protect their child's ascension as heir of the throne. Because if you think of English history, there were a lot of princes around who could have risen to the throne, and each one's mother wanted their own child to be the highest one. Everyone looked out and did what they had to protect their own children.
Okay, I think we have.
Laurie just has her hand up, and then we can go on.
Phoebe did things to protect others too, that you have to realize she was given the skills to protect herself, and she passed those skills on. She didn't want anybody to get lost. In her book, she wrote the stories of the women that were being sold. When July was sent away, she sewed 2 secret pockets for her and gave her herbs so she could be a healer, and used information she had, and she gave her money in the second pocket. You know, Phoebe was taught that there's a morality, and she tried to pass that on. You know, even though she went to church originally to be able to go away, she took the others with her to church to give them something special. So she believed that there was, as bad as things were, she believed there was some goodness in the world, and you had to help to show this goodness to others. And I think that was something that helped her survive.
Okay, I'm sorry, Lori. I didn't realize that you had your hand up there. But it seems as if there's 2 questions left. I'll do number 7 and then Anna can finish with number 11. So what was it about Phoebe that made the jailer choose her? Even when he fathered children with other enslaved women, why do you think he chose to keep Phoebe as the mistress of the jail?
Donna?
She wouldn't undress. She had spunk. The other ones, had to undress and be modeled around naked. So he saw that she had spunk. Perhaps she spoke in her white language, but he saw something in her that he decided he wanted.
Elaine?
I think it had to do with her looks too, because she looked white and supposedly had the curly hair, not the real curly, but curly type hair like as her Aunt Sally had. And I think that had a lot to do with it. When he looked at her, he felt he wouldn't have Black children. He would probably have the white children that he wanted. And I really think that had a lot to do with it.
Fran and then Harriet?
He had the most class overall. Appearance, deportment, the education she received. She just conducted herself in a superior way.
Harriet?
And if you remember, the first gift that he gave her was a silver thimble, but she had the talent to sew. So he honored her with the value of the gift. It was the most valuable thing she had ever owned, she said. So it was a possession. He was giving her a possession. And actually, that was pretty transactional. She became his possession. Most valued possession.
Okay, guess we can move on.
She also used pretty fancy language. She said, I wish to be exempted. I mean, that's a multiple syllable, significant chutzpahdik word. The final question is, what were the dangers of Phoebe's daughters passing as white women in the post-bellum society? Why do you think Bertie chose to stay with her mother and not pass for white? Compare and contrast Bertie and Hester's childhood and personalities, and why they chose their own separate paths.
Harriet?
Well, Bertie had chutzpah. He did. And I think that's a personality thing. The other girls wanted to move away from it, but not leave completely. Remember, she told them to destroy her letters. And some said, I can't destroy it. That's destroying my mother. So it became symbolic.
Denise?
I thought, unfortunately, they chose the easier way out because they could pass as white. Bertie felt differently. She felt that she wanted to hold on to that part of her heritage. But they had very comfortable lives as a result. The one says that she married a lawyer and, their kids go to the best schools, etc. So to me, it was that they chose the easier way out. And I don't know, who could blame them in a way?
I don't know that it was easy, because then you have to spend the whole rest of your life pretending to be what you're not. I mean, I understand what you're saying, Denise.
That's true.
Right now, I'm reading The Personal Librarian, and
yeah,
and Morgan's librarian passes as white, and it spends. I'm not haven't read that much yet, but it spends a whole lot of time talking about her mental state, and that every statement she makes, she thinks about before she makes it.
Yeah.
And then it's cutting off your ties. It certainly was safer So I guess what I'm
Right.
saying is I don't know that it was easier. It was way safer. Because
Yes,
even when the
that's
slaves
true.
were enslaved.
That's true. Because when
South was
she,
up.
yeah, because when she writes the letter to her mother, she even says she managed to get away and speak with Monroe. But she has to pretend that she's doing something else. So yeah, I guess easier is not the right word. There were still, there was still some subterfuge involved so that her secret would not come out.
Margie?
Well, just like in a personal librarian, if you live in this white world, you can't let people know that you have black blood. So she can't say who her family is, they're dead or whatever, I mean, it's just, they don't exist, which I think is very sad too. Everything she does is kind of in secret when she writes to her mother. So you're giving up part of who you are.
Yep. Karen?
I find it really interesting that there's so many books that have come out in the last 2 years about these women who could pass. What was the one? Is it the other half about the two sisters? Yeah, and how the one sister decided to pass as white. And there's a movie about that's on now, Passing, I think it is. And more of these stories are coming out. And I agree with Eileen. I don't think it was I think it was hard, but these women saw the weight, and maybe they thought their children's lives would be better if they looked whiter as each generation went on. And but I don't think it was easy, because they, as in the personal librarian, they had to hide it their entire lives. And I found it interesting in the personal librarian, in the back, if you see her picture, and I'm not ruining anything, Eileen, but to me, she does look black. So I guess it depends, on what, on how they looked, but I don't think their lives were easier.
Diana?
Birdie had less of a choice. Her skin was darker, don't forget. So that choice was maybe made a little for her. And it wasn't only that they had black blood that was the problem. The problem was their father's name was Reuben LePierre, who, after the Civil War, his reputation was deservedly down in the toilet. So they could not, if you remember, Phoebe changed all their names to Belle, which was the name of her first plantation owner and her father, Jacob Bell, because there were less connotations and it would be safer for the girls. So it wasn't only their black blood that was the problem, it was their paternal heritage.
Point.
Okay. Shall we rate? Are you
Go
girls?
rate.
Okay, because we're losing people rapidly who I'm sure have other things to do, and they've all left nice little notes that they've enjoyed this, so just to pass that one. All right, Bonnie, you're first on my screen. Bonnie, you gotta unmute.
Okay. I think I would give.
I would give,
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on Bonnie Zuckerman, but Bonnie Cohen, you can be next, because I'm just going by my screen.
Okay. So it's Bonnie Zuckerman?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. I think I would give it an 8. It was a real eye opener, but I think because of the storyline was really good, but the gore, that's what really got me. The beatings and the pepper and all that kind of thing. The women getting beaten and losing, babies. That just kind of really got me. So I think I would give it an 8.
Okay. Arlene, you're next on my screen.
I chose the book. I think I'd give it a 9. When people ask me about the book, or I've heard other people say that they enjoy the book, I don't think that's the term that I could ever use for the book. It wasn't an enjoyable book, but it was a necessary book. It was something that I think that everyone needs to hear about. And especially now when you hear what's going on in schools where they're trying to ban books and suppress learning and they're taking mouths off the shelf. And I personally found a lot to equate what she writes about in Yellow Wife with what our people went through in the Holocaust. So again, I don't think that I could say I enjoyed the book, but I thought it was extremely well written and a necessary book. And I thank you all for your wonderful answers and discussion points. I thought it was very, very stimulating and a very good discussion. So thank you.
And we thank you and Anna because your preparation was superb. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Diana? Oh, I skipped Bonnie Cohen, didn't I? Let's
Yes.
skip Bonnie Cohen and then Diana.
Okay, thank you. I was amazed by the book. I don't know what fairyland I was living in. I knew it wasn't easy, but I had no concept that it was as difficult and horrendous as she depicted it. And I really kept saying, wow, wow, I didn't know that. Wow. It was very realistic. And it was well written. I think I practically ate the book rather than read it. It was so fast. So I'd have to give it a 10.
Okay, thank you, Diana.
I'd give it a 9. It was a very important book, a very real book.
Thank you, Margie.
I give it a 9 or 10. I learned a lot. I mean, there's a pecking order within the white society too, that if you're a jailer, you can't marry a white woman. I mean, what is this? This is nuts. My opinion.
Got it. Thank you. Ellen? Elaine?
Me? Me?
No, not you. I'm sorry. Ellen and Elaine that are together, but yes, go.
Elaine never says a word. She can do the rating. Go ahead.
Well, I'll rate it as a 10. I found it very interesting and very knowledgeable, and I have spoken to people about it, and they said, oh, I couldn't read anything like that. I have enough problems.
Okay,
Well,
well,
I gave it a 10.
We speak as one.
Go for it. Okay, now the other Elaine Millendorf.
Oh, okay. I would rate it a 9. I think it was very potent that you had to read the book to learn about to learn more history. I love reading about this, even though it's historical fiction. I love to read about all the different things of to learn more about what's going on, what has gone on in this world. And I think that people have to have that in their lives. I mean, we can't keep saying that we're not going to have these children read books so they don't know what happened years ago. We can't deny our history, whether it's this, whether it's the Holocaust, whatever it is. I think it's very important for us to learn these different things. And as I said, I rated a 9.
Thank you. Fran and then Audrey.
I think it was a very impactful book, painful, but the truth hurts, and probably something that will resonate with us for some time afterwards. It kept me going. I couldn't put it down. The characters were very interesting. I would give it a 9.
I'd also give it a 9. I think it was a good read. It certainly made you feel. And when something evokes so much emotion, I think it's a really good book. And I learned a lot, and the discussion was great again. Thanks.
Thank you. Denise and then Enid.
I would give it a 9. I thought it was a very compelling read. I kept wanting to get back to the book and see what would happen. The characters were well drawn. I had read Cast by Isabel Wilkerson when it came out, I don't know, a year or two ago. And that is, I would definitely urge you to read that. That is a nonfiction study of slavery in the U.S. But, fiction has the ability to reach more people. Word of mouth and book clubs, which largely focus around fiction. But yeah, I thoroughly can't say enjoyed it, but I thought it was very well done, and it's a 9.
Enid?
Read it.
You're muted, Enid. Enid, we can't hear anything. You're muted.
Okay, okay. Jefferson and Sally Hemings were master and slave who loved each other. So I think I just had to throw that in. This isn't a subject I would normally have chosen, but I'm really glad that I read the book. I give it a 9. The only thing I found disappointing was the end. I think it was missing too much information. I would have liked to have heard a little bit more what happened later on.
Okay, thank you. Harriet and then Marcia.
I would give it a 9. I also ate it up. There were like no marks on the corners of my book. Just kidding. But I really did enjoy it thoroughly. I did relate to it with the Holocaust story. Some of us exchanged information on that. In that, you know, women that were blonde haired and light colored eyes and attractive had it a little easier, Jewish women in Germany. And I know that from personal information that was exchanged. But the story was engrossing. I mean, you could not put this book down. I mean, I'm in Hawaii and I'm reading this book like it's, you know, a lot more important than the beauty outside. And so it's pretty wonderful. It's a great book and an important book. And I agree about Cass. And by the way, Share Me is doing an excellent program. If people want to join in, we read quite a few books over the past 2 years. We read Cass in the fall, and there's another one coming up. It's really been a great exchange. We have a lot of great women in our community. Absolutely. And I love today's discussion.
Marcia?
Discussion was wonderful. I thoroughly was compelled by the book. I rated a 9. I really learned a lot, and I love the historical fiction where I learned something. But I do agree that I was a little disappointed in the end because I was so captivated when she took him to the boat, and then we don't know what happened. I can't imagine that he wasn't like so furious with her, the jailer, that she helped them escape. And it just kind of left me up to me down because I was so enamored and going on and on reading it. So I would have liked to have known a little bit more about what happened when she left them at the boat, and then when she got home, and then at the end. But that was my only negative. So I give it a 9. It was great. And thank you, Arlene, for picking it. It was something I would have never picked myself. So thank you.
You're
Great
welcome.
discussion.
Okay, my whole screen just changed. So I think that it's Donna, Eileen, and Anna who have not said anything yet. So if I'm missing anybody else, let me know. So Donna, Eileen, and Anna.
Okay. Well, I always appreciate everyone's comments. I love how we basically stay on the book, and if there's a sidetrack, it's very pertinent. And our conversations are just fabulous. And thank you very much to the presenters. You guys did a wonderful job. I listened to 2 videos from the author. I just Googled the author's name, and learned a lot about her, and that really helped to take the book even further. One of the things that Sadeka, whatever her name is, said was if the people lived those terrible situations, and she could write about those terrible situations. I thought that was a very good comment that she made, because it was really hard to read at times, all the terrible situations. I'd give the book an 8.5. It was very good, but I've had other books that I've appreciated more.
Okay, thank you, Eileen.
First of all, thank you for this excellent choice. I really found the book to be engrossing, and the conversation was engrossing as well. And I absolutely agree with everything that Marcia said. I would give the book a 9 because I too was really surprised and disappointed that they didn't talk about what happened after that escape. The jailer was such a brutal person and such a vindictive person. I can't believe that he didn't kill her, because she clearly enabled that escape, and for her to go back and live the life and inherit his estate, that just didn't make any sense to me. But everything else I thought was very powerful, and it rang true, and a really worthwhile story to read.
So that leaves Anna, am I right?
Well, thank you for the opportunity of, thank you for choosing the book, Arlene. I think it's an 8.5 or 9. I don't know if it's because I listened to it, but I thought it was really well written. She didn't shy away from the atrocities. Maybe I would have preferred not to know all the details of the horrible treatment. I think about the woman losing her baby while she's delivering her after birth. They throw the baby out. I mean, the smells, just the atrocities. It wasn't fun to read with those situations, but these are, depicting real events that I'm sure passed. I'm looking forward, thank you again, Arlene, to when I visit my brother in Virginia to go on that trail. And I really liked reading the book and recognizing Carey Street and Gray Street my brother lived on. This was reliving a really good historic fiction for explaining what happened at the time.
Thank you. That leaves me. I would give it a 9 for all the reasons that everybody said. The ending kind of left me short. It did say that she was in bed for 2 weeks. We don't know if it was just grief or because he beat her. But I would have liked to know more of what happened. As far as the atrocities, she was questioned on the necessity of it. I read that in an interview with her. And her point was that it's what happened, and we need to know. Like, Spiegelman's book, Mouse, was just taken out of that Tennessee school because of the same reasons they said, because of the atrocities that were depicted. Well, the Holocaust was full of atrocities, of slavery. And I fully admit that I'm not great at reading that. I've told you before, I read late into the night, and when it became apparent that Essex was going to have the beating he got, I put the book aside and waited till the following morning. But it's reality. And I think we only move forward when we recognize the reality of what happened during that time.
Right.
Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add? Ellen?
Yes, Anise.
I guess I'll say one thing. I definitely understand how the brutality was important to the story and the book. I don't think that all slave owners treated their slaves that way, but that's almost beside the point. The whole system was brutal.
Whole system, yeah.
Right.
We got onto a topic of book banning and some other things. So we're on the fringe of something political, and I'm going to cross over the fringe a little bit. If you haven't read Adam Schiff's book, Midnight in Washington, now would be a very good time to pick it up. It's excellent and very well written. And it's funny that we've mentioned some of the topics that Adam Schiff mentions. Good book. You can tell I read incessantly. It's my vice.
Not a bad vice to have. Well, again, thank you, Arlene.
Thank you, Arlene.
Anna.
And
You did a
Anna.
great job.
Thank you.
Great job.
Excellent.
Now,
Both of you.
Very good job.
Yay, book
Before I
club.
leave, is next month going to be in person?
I thought we were waiting for numbers.
It seems hopeful, but I guess we should wait to make a judgment closer to the date.
Right.
That's fine.
Can I
Yes,
say,
we'll let everybody know.
Right.
we
Didn't we
depend
decide
on-
at our board meeting in January that we're going to go back to doing book club and our meetings.
Well, we're definitely having an in-person meeting in March.
But I can't make it. I play in a band, and the band rehearsal is right after this. And I mean, I can't make it from my apartment to band rehearsal on time. And I'll turn this around and show you. I have there's all my band, my guitar sitting right there.
God bless you.
You
have other vices.
So if you're not going to be online, please warn me.
If we do have it in person, there will still be the Zoom component.
Oh,
excellent.
And I would comment that if we have it in person,
by Zoom.
and it would be in person with caution. Because
Right, and I'm fine with waiting. You girls.
We
are in
have to
charge
wait
of
and
that.
see, I think.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Good to see everybody.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you
Nice
so
to
much.
see- Nice to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.